Special thanks to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for sponsoring today's video. Could Isshin have defeated Aizen during the Fake Karakura Town Arc before the Hōgyoku activated in their one-on-one duel? I know it sounds ludicrous. How could Isshin possibly defeat Aizen alone when the entire Gotei 13 couldn't, and were handily bested by him only a few chapters prior? And yet, it's not quite as absurd as it may first seem. Events and circumstances within the source material were lining up in such a way as to paint a path to a potential victory for Isshin over Aizen in their battle. But the real question is, how? What could that fight have looked like were it allowed to play out a little differently? Does the answer to this question lie in the Hōgyoku and the way the mysterious orb works? There's a lot to look at in this hypothetical bout. How strong is Isshin really, and why does he appear to be, well, so strong, at least in comparison to his former Gotei colleagues? What can we learn from the very short fight they actually had? For the purposes of answering whether or not Isshin could have defeated Aizen here in the Fake Karakura Town, this video won't really be looking at anything beyond chapter 401, the moment Aizen actually begins to transcend, because from that point onwards it is effectively over. I say mostly because even then Kubo dropped an intriguing little crumb that seems to hint at Isshin being even more powerful than we first thought, but we'll get into that a bit later on. So, could Isshin have defeated Aizen before the Hōgyoku took effect and helped the villain transcend to a different plane? Were the two of them given the time to fight it out properly? Could Isshin have ultimately prevailed in the end? We've done a couple of videos like this in the past, looking at hypothetical fights that very nearly played out, or played out at least a little bit, and they all seem to involve Aizen. Whether that's Yamamoto versus Aizen again here in the Fake Karakura Town Arc, or Yhwach versus Aizen at the end of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, so make sure to check those out too. Anyway, without further ado, let's dive into this hypothetical battle taking place in the earliest stages of Deicide. The turning point for Aizen's character, where he began to achieve all that he had desired, and leave everyone else behind. Had he never quite reached that point, how would things have turned out in his battle with Isshin? Let's take a look first at what we do actually know, how their short fight played out in the source material itself. And when I say it's a short fight, I really do mean it. There isn't a lot to this battle at all between Isshin and Aizen before he begins to transcend. After all, it's mostly playing second fiddle to the long-awaited rematch between Ichigo and Gin, at least to begin with. And yet, right from the get-go, Isshin is in complete control, overpowering and overwhelming Aizen in a way that feels almost jarring to behold. Bear in mind that Aizen has been fighting continuously now for a lengthy straight sequence of chapters, and for the entirety of that time he has been dominating the battlefield, an absolute force of nature to be reckoned with. And yet suddenly, with the arrival of Isshin, the tables seem to have inexplicably turned. After Isshin appears before Ichigo to rescue him from Aizen's psychological torment, the two decide to split up and take on a villain each. Ichigo locks blades with Gin, which we discussed in detail recently in our latest battle analysis video, while Isshin carves away a huge chunk of the building that Aizen is standing on, throwing up a curtain of dust before lunging for the traitorous Shinigami, the two of them clashing in mid-air. As their duel begins, Aizen is wearing his trademark smug grin, but it's quickly wiped away as Isshin performs an unorthodox and strange move, removing one hand from the hilt of his sword and instead resting it upon his arm before flicking his middle finger at Aizen, sending the villain rocketing backwards. This move, called Oni Deco Pin, is unlike anything we have ever seen before in Bleach, and immediately threw a spanner in the works. All of a sudden, Isshin had managed to achieve more than almost the entire Gotei 13 combined in the space of a few seconds at the start of their fight, with Aizen now barreling backwards, smashing through multiple tower blocks. Just like that, the stakes were raised. How powerful exactly was Isshin going to turn out to be? This ability, which is clearly Hakuda based, and how it had such an effect on Aizen has never really been explained, and perhaps it doesn't need to be, but that's an issue that comes inherently with writing Aizen. No one would necessarily bat an eyelid at this simple finger flick being used on any other character, but when it's suddenly used to such great effect against the most seemingly unstoppable fighter in the series to date, well, questions are rightly raised. I'm of the belief that Oni Dekopin itself doesn't need to be the focus of the discussion, but that it's a small piece of a much bigger puzzle. Anyway, the fight continues with Aizen on the back foot, which again is already surprising enough to see. After being sent flying, he regains his footing, landing on the edge of a rooftop, but not before Isshin is already bearing down upon him. Kubo draws Isshin in such a way here as to look enormous, his massive frame filling the entire panel. This imposing appearance, Isshin's furious face, his sword raised above his head, is designed to make him look overbearing and powerful, and it really works. And again, it is weird to see Aizen of all characters being made to look so small and helpless in the face of this relentless oppression. Isshin brings his blade downwards in a massive arc, shattering the ground beneath him as Aizen darts out of the way. Unwilling, however, to give his enemy any breathing room, Isshin quickly twists on the spot and swings his blade at Aizen again, but the villain ducks beneath it and takes advantage of a brief opening, resting his hand against Isshin's exposed chest. Without an incantation of any kind, Aizen casually unleashes Hado 63 Raikoho, and a rippling wave of yellow lightning zips across the cityscape, illuminating the battlefield. It's a really nice, albeit small, piece of choreography between the two. And then the next time we see these two, their fight has mostly dwindled to a stall. It's essentially over already. Instead, they begin speaking, and it's a very illuminating conversation. Isshin and Aizen come to a stop some ways apart, Isshin seemingly gearing up to continue their fight. Interestingly, Isshin is actually lightly injured now, featuring several bloodied bruises on his face, yet he still gives off the impression of being in complete control during this fight. Aizen is the most reserved, the most shrunken during this very short bout than we've ever seen him before, only regaining that trademark confidence once the Hōgyoku begins to take control. Now it's almost like a different character. And of course there is a reason for all of that, as I just alluded to. He's fighting more carefully than ever before, realizing deep within the time is near. The time for the Hōgyoku to finally get to work, and he just needs to survive until then. Basically, even for Aizen, this isn't the time for theatrics. Anyway, as the two break apart once more, it is Aizen's foot that we see skidding backwards, implying he's once again been forced back by Isshin, who definitely seems to have the upper hand physically. Resting on his laurels momentarily, Isshin then asks Aizen what's wrong, as he seems to be slowing down, before following up with another question: has Aizen reached his limit already? Okay, I remember not seeing that coming at all. Remember, this is the same guy who just completely dominated the entire Gotei 13, seemingly without breaking a sweat. And yet here, Aizen hasn't really done anything at all in this fight so far. Why hasn't he used Kyoka Suigetsu, for example? Is Isshin even under its spell at all? I would assume so, since they were captains at the same time, so surely that's an option. If not Shikai, then what about bankai? Aizen professed to have achieved absolute mastery of the Shinigami combat arts, which would theoretically include a bankai, and personally I wouldn't think that was the case without one. But no, instead Aizen simply relents, throwing up his hands essentially and admitting that yes, he has indeed reached his limit as a Shinigami at least. In my opinion, this is the most surprising and yet enlightening exchange of their entire duel. As Aizen notes that his soul is beginning to change, it's at this point that he begins to transcend, and the fight is now out of Isshin's hands. But before this, Isshin was apparently stomping him, and Aizen himself, perhaps Bleach's most arrogant character, admitted that he was essentially at his wit's end. How can this be? He has barely tried anything in this fight so far and has seemingly barely done anything to really fight back. He's gone from being this tyrannical conqueror, essentially, who couldn't be defeated, who could barely be laid a hand upon, to someone who now seems to have shriveled away in the face of Isshin's strength. And crucially, on the other side of the coin, what does this mean for how strong Isshin is? Why isn't Aizen using his Zanpakuto at all? I've always firmly been of the belief that Aizen doesn't transcend until this very moment, the cliffhanger of chapter 400. And the story tells you as much, meaning he was likely still killable until the Hōgyoku finally began to remake him. The question of Aizen's supposed limit then is definitely still the most intriguing to me. And what does it really even mean? Aizen is of course extraordinarily powerful, but I guess it makes sense that even he might be a little tired out after such continuous fighting. Then Isshin shows up kind of out of nowhere, fresh and ready to battle, and it's enough to push Aizen to the edge. Obviously, their fight here is pretty truncated and just a vehicle to get us to the point of Aizen's first transformation, but I think what makes it weird is just how little we see from him before he appears to be beaten. And of course, it didn't help that at this point we knew absolutely nothing about Isshin, really. There was no possible comparison tool. After this, the fight is effectively over. Aizen monologues to Isshin about the true nature of the Hōgyoku as it begins to take the reins, starting the chrysalis process as it forcibly restructures Aizen's soul, changing him into something new. And so we've seen all we can. What does it mean for whether or not Isshin could actually defeat Aizen here? Well, before we continue on with that discussion, first of all, a message from today's sponsor. Well, August is here, a new month is upon us, and of course, that means a brand new set of Japanese snack boxes from Tokyo Treat, and of course, Sakurako as well. So let's not waste any time, let's dive in and see what they've got for us this time. First up is Tokyo Treat. Now, Tokyo Treat is a monthly Japanese snack box that features unique and seasonal flavors from all across Japan. Each box contains a variety of up to 20 fun and exclusive Japanese snack items, like limited edition Kit Kats, and some Japanese sodas that are only available in Japan for a limited time. Tokyo Treat's theme this month is Summer Matsuri Flavor Fest, inviting you to dive into Japan's summer festival season in style, with snacks like Ramune Mochi, Kakiguri gummies, Kit Kat Gold Caramel, and more. Right, look at that. Now that is a lovely sight. Now let me tell you something, it is absolutely boiling here in the UK. If you can't tell from my face, it is extremely hot, but luckily Tokyo Treat has come prepared this month with some cool down candy, as it's called, actually called cool down candy. So let's crack it open and see if it does the trick. You know what? That is surprisingly cold. I'm not gonna lie, that is surprisingly cold. So the booklet says, pop one of these hard candies in your mouth and enjoy the cooling sensation in either orange or green apple flavor. This is green apple, I'll tell you right now. And you know what? It is actually working. So Tokyo Treat may have just saved my life. And the next thing we're going to try from Tokyo Treat this month is something we mentioned at the start of the video, which is the Kakiguri gummies. Now that to me again looks like shaved ice, looks like flavored ice or something. So we're going with a cooling down theme this month because we really need it. I'm not going to lie. And I can't have a fan on when I record either because it makes too much noise. So they look really cool. They're like miniature crushed ice, miniature shaved ice. Look at that. That's kind of neat. They're covered in sugar pieces to give off the sensation that it is shaved ice. That's really neat. That's really cool. And they are very, very tasty. Very fruity. I love that. That's really nice. Meanwhile, Sakurako is a monthly Japanese artisan snack box that supports local snack makers. Each box comes with 20 traditional authentic Japanese snacks, including Japanese teas and a special Japanese tableware. This month, Sakurako is offering the Kingyo Mino Ware plate as part of its theme, the islands of Okinawa, and I really do love this plate. It is extremely cute and frankly, very pretty. I'm a big fan. Renowned for stunning picturesque beaches, Okinawa's sun-drenched landscape makes for the perfect summer getaway, and Sakurako is bringing some of that vibe to your home with snacks like Kukoto Castella cakes, a vanilla cream waffle cookie, and Okinawan sweet potato chinsuko, all of which pair deliciously with Okinawan sanpin tea, also included. Now, what immediately caught my eye, again being a fan of gummies, was this fishy fella. That's kind of neat. So what we're going to do is we're going to bite his head off. That is a substantial gummy. Actually, it's a bit more like marshmallow, I believe. Basically went into it expecting the wrong texture, I think. That's cool. That's nice. This rather stunning packaging has caught my eye. Very, very pretty. I like that a lot. That's really rather nice. So this is a summer senbei, which has been generously coated in a blend of honey and soy sauce, an authentic sweet and savory snack. Let's dig in. There it is, looking rather crispy. Let's hope this first bite is a satisfying one. That's a very satisfying crunch. A piece of it went flying. That's very good. Not particularly cooling. The Sakurako box seems to be going for a different vibe here. And of course, no matter which box you go for, each one comes with a detailed booklet that contains a wealth of valuable information, not just on the snacks themselves, but on Japanese culture and the culture that shaped this month's themes. Meaning that you too can enjoy the snacks while getting to know everything there is to learn about them, where they're from, how they're made, and the history, traditions, and fun that goes into every single box. Plus, that all-important allergen information can be found inside too. But that's it for August's summary boxes. As always, I wanted to say a big thank you to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for supporting the channel by sponsoring today's video. If you want to treat yourself or someone you know to one of these boxes, then make sure to follow the links down in the description and the pinned comment as well, and use my code TOMO for $5 off your purchase. Thanks everyone, and enjoy. Okay, so then, to answer that question, let's take a quick yet holistic look at what we know of the individual combatants to try and form a picture of the battle that would take place. Starting with Aizen, well, even before he transcends, he is on a totally different level to most other Shinigami. A master supposedly of all 4 Shinigami combat arts with immeasurable Ryoryoku and one of the most broken Zanpakuto in the series, it is difficult to fathom him losing against anyone save for the most powerful of characters, like Yamamoto, for example. And of course, he's only just decimated much of the combined forces of the Gotei 13 and the Vizard on his own, capable of practically splitting Komamura and his bankai in two with a single swing. Aizen himself notes how much weaker the Espada were than him, to the point of his great disappointment. So, where is this fabled power in his battle with Isshin? Why isn't he using Kyoku Suigetsu? If Aizen senses that the Hōgyoku is close to understanding him, then he may be making a conscious choice already to leave his Zanpakuto behind. The thing is, I could buy that Aizen is simply biding his time and waiting for the Hōgyoku to activate in order to truly kind of lord it over Isshin. In fact, that almost feels like the most likely case. As I mentioned earlier, it does feel like Aizen is just trying to stay alive for as long as he needs to. And even though it feels like Isshin is overwhelming him, the truth is that Aizen is unharmed by the end of their duel, while Isshin is injured. So then, is it Aizen who is secretly in control of their battle after all? I could completely buy that, but Aizen is a funny character. Despite his duplicitous, manipulative nature, he is also remarkably honest about certain things, namely his own strength. He's so powerful that he doesn't need to inflate his own ability with boastful, falsified words. So when he tells Isshin that he's reached his limit, I tend to believe him. This idea of Aizen reaching his limit is what I'm struggling with, especially when it comes about in a one-on-one fight with Isshin, where Aizen doesn't appear to be trying all that hard in the first place. Like I said before, what does his limit really mean in a fight where he's barely trying? Or maybe, just maybe, he really has given it his all and is now struggling to best Isshin in raw combat, but again, I do have trouble with that. And then there's Isshin himself. What do we really know about him? While there isn't really any evidence pointing to Isshin being much stronger than your average captain, save for his performance against Aizen here, it absolutely can be inferred. After all, it's possible that a decent chunk of Ichigo's own immense power was inherited from Isshin himself, and there's a moment coming up that we'll talk about later that I think helps to back this idea up. Let's not forget as well that Isshin was also a high-ranking member of one of the 5 great noble houses, the Shiba clan, a fact that likely means he has immense Ryoryoku. Greater than most captains probably, as it's explained that aristocrats often have higher levels of spirit energy. Speaking of his latent Ryoryoku, Isshin successfully holds back the Koryu current of the Bankai for 2,000 hours using just his own power. Ordinarily, to stop the current at all would require potentially dozens of Shinigami officers. Isshin also killed Grand Fisher in a single hit, while a much younger version of the former captain duked it out with White using only his Shikai. White, by the way, being the closest thing to a successful Shinigami and Hollow hybrid Aizen and his men ever created, essentially, until the likes of Tosen. Isshin was able to hold his own against the monstrous creature and even take off one of White's arms. In fact, Isshin was deemed such a threat to their creation that Aizen steps in to sneakily wound the captain, preventing him from using Bankai and trying to lower Isshin's chances of victory. So you can see that while Isshin doesn't get many chances to fight in the source material, the story has more subtle means of telling us just how powerful he really is. So Aizen isn't just dealing with any ordinary Shinigami here or even any ordinary captain, he's fighting the former head of one of the greatest noble clans in the Soul Society, from whom Ichigo likely inherited a lot of his strength. Don't forget that Aizen himself is just incredibly powerful. There's no rhyme or reason to it, nor does there need to be, and the same can be true of Isshin too. Ultimately, we don't have a lot of experience with Isshin as a character. He's still very much an enigma even after the revelations of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. Even if he is just a very powerful Shinigami, so are the likes of Kyoraku and Shinji, both of whom were cut down by Aizen in a single stroke. So for Isshin to take him on so successfully like this always stood out. Now, of course, there are always variables to consider here. Both Kyoraku and Shinji were already tired and injured from their previous fights against Stark and Aizen himself respectively, whereas Isshin has just turned up. But the question posed at the top of this video was, can Isshin defeat Aizen before the Hōgyoku activates? And, well, based on what we see in the source material, I think the answer has to be yes, I think he can. But as you might expect, that comes with an asterisk attached. The truth is, we don't really know what's happening in this fight. If what we're being presented with is the complete picture, then I don't see why Isshin wouldn't eventually overpower this slowing, tired version of Aizen and defeat him. For whatever reason, Aizen isn't using Kyoku Suigetsu. If he did, then I think the fight would actually probably be over, but he doesn't. And so based on the evidence given in the source material, it definitely feels like Isshin would take the win here. Am I saying that Isshin is stronger than Shinigami Aizen? Of course not. But maybe it's closer than we think, and maybe Aizen being worn down is enough to give Isshin the edge. Yes, the Hōgyoku is healing Aizen's wounds, as we see when Ichigo damages him earlier, but that's only because he's already become its master. Aizen himself is still just a Shinigami up until the Hōgyoku finally begins to replace his soul with a shiny new one. If Isshin can overcome Aizen's healing with brute strength, then I see no reason why he can't win. Aizen should have the sheer power necessary to just rend Isshin in two based on his fight against the Gotei 13, but he's heavily on the back foot and being pressured at all times by a fighter who is just much fresher. I will say continuously that it is jarring either way. To go from Gin's monologue about how Aizen is completely unstoppable and his power moves the heavens and the earth, to Aizen barely escaping Isshin and unable to keep up is quite the shift, and the natural response is to assume Isshin is much stronger then than those that came before, even if I don't think it's quite accurate. The inconvenient truth is that the battle between Isshin and Aizen simply isn't long enough nor detailed enough to glean much useful from it, but we're here to make a somewhat educated guess. Now, while I said earlier that I wasn't going to touch upon the battle beyond Chapter 401 and Aizen's subsequent transformation, I do want to, very briefly. As mentioned earlier, once Aizen begins to transcend and his soul undergoes reconstruction, Isshin is no longer capable of defeating him. As soon as Aizen is enveloped by the Hōgyoku's cocoon, his entire spiritual body is broken down inside. He is quite literally being remade. We get a small hint at this when Isshin manages to break open the cocoon. Inside, all they can see is a weird shifting mass of purple energy, as Isshin himself wonders what on earth is going on in there. Certainly it doesn't appear to be Aizen anymore. And from the moment Aizen emerged in his full cocoon form, Isshin is no longer able to sense his Reiatsu, the sign that Aizen is now on a higher plane than him, effectively making victory impossible. And yet, there is a single moment during this portion of the fight that shows just how monstrously powerful Isshin is, or at the very least, alludes to it, and I feel like it goes a little bit overlooked. After Yoruichi and Kisuke team up to land an explosive hit on Aizen, Isshin appears through the flames to deliver the final decisive blow. Reiatsu wrapped around his sword, he brings his blade down upon Aizen, unleashing a colossal Getsuga Tensho that rips through the Karakura landscape. It's practically a point-blank strike, delivered with pure power and calculated ferocity. In the aftermath of the blast, Isshin notes that ever since Aizen transformed, he hasn't been able to read his spirit energy. In fact, as Isshin tries to attack Aizen, to him it almost feels like he's not even there, as if they are fighting a ghost. And I appreciate the irony of the fact that they are actual ghosts, but you know what I mean. Here, Kubo is trying to tell us that there is more to transcendence than simply not being able to feel someone's power anymore. Their entire being, their presence, is wraith-like and ethereal. And yet, as Aizen steps out of the flames of Isshin's Getsuga, we see that he's been heavily wounded. Now, the trio of Isshin, Kisuke, and Yoruichi has successfully injured, and I say that in quotation marks, Aizen before, managing to crack his cocoon on several occasions. But this is new. Isshin's Getsuga has actually broken the cocoon open, revealing the contents inside. Aizen himself even notes that he understood that attack, and again the wording by Kubo here is very deliberate. Up until now, Aizen has likely barely been registering their strikes, no matter how powerful. But for one fleeting moment, for one hit, Isshin managed to scrape the summit that Aizen is standing on, leading even Aizen to feel that strike. Now, obviously, Isshin isn't transcendent, but it's clear some characters are powerful enough that by mustering everything they have, they can just about reach a level similar to that for a fraction of a moment. However brief, this is proof of Isshin's power. At this point, Aizen decides enough is enough. It's clearly a little concerning to him that someone came this close to actually wounding him. And I have to wonder, had the fight continued and Isshin was able to break apart the cocoon even more, what would happen to Aizen? Would he be forcibly ejected midway through evolution? It's hard to know. However, Aizen then proceeds to defeat all three of them in record time, proving all along that he was capable of crushing them without much effort, humouring their attempts to stop him. And to be fair to Isshin once again, he gets up almost immediately after this hit, and is still able to hold back the Koryu current with no discernible effort, at least to begin with, until the training drags on a bit. So once again, it is clear that Isshin is a bit of a beast. Anyway, like I said, I'm not going to dwell on this part of the fight for too long, but I did think it was worthwhile to bring attention to just how powerful it seems Isshin really is, and this is all without even activating his Zanpakuto. So then, as we close out the video, let's circle back to that original question. Could Isshin defeat Aizen here in the Fake Karakura Town Arc before the Hōgyoku began to remake his soul? Before Aizen became transcendent? It's a little tougher to answer than when we looked at Yamamoto versus Aizen, as we know far more about what Yamamoto is truly capable of. Isshin is, for the most part, a mystery to this day. I feel somewhat remiss in not mentioning Isshin's Zanpakuto at all, Engetsu, but frankly we don't really know enough about it, and from what we do know, I'm not sure it makes much of a difference either way. If Isshin is already overwhelming Aizen at this early stage, then activating Engetsu will likely just help him apply the pressure even more. Engetsu is a weird Zanpakuto though. Based on what little we know, it seems the Shikai's fire is fueled by Isshin's blood, so he likely needs to be injured to get the most out of it. But too great an injury, and he won't be able to use his bankai. Anyway, as for the overall result of the fight, I'm inclined to say that yes, as long as it is before Aizen transcends, Isshin can win, based on what we see in the source material. This is an Aizen that is tired, that is slowing down, and that admits to having reached his limit, while there are plenty of hints at Isshin's true power being something incredible. There are several caveats though. Why isn't Aizen using his Zanpakuto? That's perhaps the biggest one. After all, despite his incredible, enormous power, his superior intellect, his immense Ryoryoku, it was Kyokusuigetsu that gave him the ultimate upper hand against the Gotei 13 and destabilized that cabal of captains. So why isn't he using it here? If Aizen did actually use Kyokusuigetsu, I think it would be much tougher, if not completely impossible, for Isshin to defeat him, as Aizen's Shikai is just that good. But based on what we see in the source material, what we know about Isshin as a combatant, then yeah, I think he stands a chance. But ultimately, that is only if Aizen doesn't transcend. To be totally honest, trying to be as objective as possible, it still feels ludicrous to say that anyone bar Yamamoto really stands a chance against Aizen in a 1v1 setting, but then Aizen and Isshin's short fight in the source is so weird to me as to make it impossible to ignore. I like the idea that he's tired out personally, but the notion of him hitting his limit as a Shinigami without activating Bankai has also never made much sense to me. Fundamentally, someone like Aizen especially would surely consider Bankai to be the true upper limit of a Shinigami's power, and I've never bought the idea that he doesn't have one either. Anyway, I'm going to end this video by saying yes, based on the many parameters we've outlined and discussed, I think Isshin could have won here. But let me know what you think. Does Isshin stand a chance at all against this version of Aizen, and what do you make of the many variables that go into a situation like this? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts, theories, and discussion about this potential fight down in the comments below. And let me know what you think of their brief canon skirmish as well that we get to see in the source material. Was Isshin actually overpowering and overwhelming Aizen in this sequence, or did Aizen somehow still have the upper hand and was still in control? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts no matter which way down in the comments. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I really hope you enjoyed it, and as always, I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Do let me know your thoughts and theories and feelings about this topic down in the comments, and as always, I want to end the video by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without whom I couldn't keep doing this, and it really does mean the absolute world to me. If you too love what I do here over on YouTube, and you also want to take that support from me another step further, thank you. By visiting the link in my description, you can go and support me over on Patreon. At the $1 tier, you can get your name in the credits like this every single week, and at $2 or up, you can receive every video I release absolutely free of baked-in YouTube ads. Alright everyone, thank you so much once again, and until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.